video, I will share the OAuth2 Flow-B details. In this flow, we will call the mtls protected obp-api endpoints. Okay, at first, we need to download the client certificate in this link. No, all the client certificates listed here. You can download the key and the CRT file and the PFX file. It can import to the browser. Import the browser. Okay. For example, in the Mac Chrome, we can reference this page to learn how to import to the Chrome. Okay, I already imported it in my Chrome, so after this I can call the obp-api endpoint banks here. Here is the result. And if we call that endpoint with postman, for example, this postman direct call that endpoint. Now we can't call the endpoint because the postman also need the client certificate. Okay, let me import it to the postman. Postman preferences, certificates, and add the client certificates. Add certificates. Okay, let me type the obp-api domain. obp-api domain right here. Copy it. It's protected by the mtls. Okay, select the CRT and the key file. Download from here. Let me select CRT file. Key file. And input the password. The password at here. Okay, after this, all the requests to the endpoints will take this client certificate. Okay, 88. Call again. Now this time we call this endpoint successfully. Okay, after this, let me create a consumer. Create two consumer. One is for the web application, another is for the mobile application. Okay, let me go to the obp-api portal. Okay, it already logged in. You can log in again. Login. After login, let me create a consumer. The first is web application web demo. Redirect URL. Redirect URL for the web application, because I will simulate the process with the postman. So here the redirect URL can be any URL. Okay, let me take it to, for example, localhost. Okay, resist. I will copy this part this part. Okay, copy. For the web application consumer. And let me create another one. Mobile. Redirect URL. For the mobile redirect URL, you can supply any valid URL, but you have other choice. Let me check this page. Okay, at here, you can supply 3 types redirect URL. The first is the private use URL schema. That means you can supply one schema. This schema band with your application. So you can supply the HTTPS schema. This domain will band with your application. So when the OAuth2 server redirect back to this link, it will pass the URL to the banned application, and you can also use the loopback interface schema. Okay. The second and the third are just the common URL, but the first is a little different. In this example, I will use the private use URL schema as the redirect URL. Okay, I copy it. And here, I paste it at here, and resist. Okay, let me copy the content. This is for the mobile consumer. Paste that here. Okay, let me start the web application OAuth2 Flow. Okay, as this demo project, the first step we need select one bank ID, and create a consent with some permissions. Okay, the first step, let me get one bank. We can call this endpoint. And get one bank ID. Let me take this bank ID as example. So the first step we get a bank ID. Right here, we get the bank ID. And the second step, we will create a consent. How to create the consent? Now, we need at first we need create one access token. That access token grant type is client credentials. Okay, let me simulate in the Postman. Okay, go to the Postman. Here is the header token URL, and post it. The client ID and the client secret. Let me copy the client ID, client secret. So paste that here. send. Okay, we get the client credentials access token at here. With this access token, we call the create account access consent, call this endpoint with the access token. Okay, go to the postman. The postman here is the link to create access consents. Okay, in the authorization, we need to supply the access token. Paste it here, the access token, and here is the tab. The body, we need to supply the data time, the 3 data time, and the permissions. Let me select all the permissions listed here, and send. Okay, let me check the response. The response, we have the consent ID. Okay, copy the consent ID at here. Now we have consent ID. We have bank ID and consent ID. After this, we already have the required parameter, the bank ID and the consent ID. Now we can start the OAuth2 flow. As this example, this step. That means when I clicked, we already finished these 2 steps. Now at here, we already have the bank ID and consent ID, so we can start the OAuth2 flow now. Here is the header link and the client ID. Let me paste it at here, client ID. And response tab is code. Scope, this to scope is used by the header. Here, all the other permissions. And the redirect URL. The redirect URL at here, we need decode. Let me decode it online. Okay, let me encode the URL online. Okay, copy this encoded URL. At here, redirect URL. Let me paste it here. This URL encode to this value and state any random string and consent ID. Let me replace with this consent ID. Consent ID. And bank ID. Let me replace it with the bank ID. Okay, we already prepared the auth link like this. Let me open this link in the browser. Bank ID not correct. Let me check the bank ID again. And the bank ID, this one, the bank ID. Okay, this one. Let me try again. Okay, it redirect to the login page. Let me submit it and check the accounts and confirm. After this, we will redirect to the redirect URL with code, with those two code. Okay, we already have this code like this. Let me copy this code. And exchange to the access token. Here, let me call the Hazard token endpoint to exchange code to access token. Okay, let me paste the code at here. And the redirect URL, here our redirect URL is this URL. And the client ID and the client secret. Client ID, this one. Client secret, this one. Client ID. Okay, let me exchange the token. Okay, we get the access token and ID token. With this access token, we can call the endpoint. Let me call the endpoint get the accounts information. Now we have not supplied the access token. It will return the error information. Let me supply the access token. Okay, send. Now we get the result. This is the web Flow-B. The web Flow-B. Okay, I will paste all the requests example. The first is get banks. The second is create client credentials access token. Copy it. And the third is create with that access token, we create the access consent. Copy it. And after the login and select accounts, we will get the code. Now we will exchange the code to access token. Copy it. And with the access token, we can call the endpoint. Okay, I copy all the requests and I will paste it at here. Okay, now I paste all the examples at here, step by step. Okay, let me continue the mobile Flow-B, mobile application Flow-B. The mobile application have a little different with the web because it need the code flow, but with PKCE you can check the content in this page. PKCE. Okay, and the redirect URL also a little different. We can use the private use URL schema or other URL. Okay, in this example, I use this private use URI schema. Okay. In this mobile application consumer, we already created the consumer like this. And the first step also need to create we also need bank ID and consent ID. The bank ID we can just use the former bank ID. The former bank ID. For example, this. Let me paste it here. Bank ID and consent ID. Let me create the consent ID. We need first we need create a client credential access token. So at here we call this endpoint with client ID and secret client ID and secret. Okay. Now we can see there is one error. From the error message, we can see for this client, we can't create the client credentials. That means only the web consumer can create a client credentials access token. So that means we need for the mobile application, we need a double consumer. One is mobile application consumer, another is web application consumer. We just use that web application consumer to create a client credentials access token. Okay. I just use another web consumer. Just use this consumer is okay. This consumer client ID and client secret client ID and send. Okay, we get the access token. We get the access token. No, we get the access token. With the access token, we can create the access consent. Okay, we have the access token, and again we create the access consent. Now paste the access token at here, and here is the access consent date and send it to create the access consent. Okay, success. Let me copy the consent ID. Now we have the consent ID. With the bank ID and consent ID, we can start the OAuth2 flow. So at here, let me copy the client ID at here and all the scopes at here. Redirect URI. Here, redirect URI. The redirect URI we need encode it. Okay, let me encode it. Encode. Copy it. Okay, paste at here. Okay, the state also random string, and the consent ID. Let me copy the the consent ID, and also the bank ID at here, because we use this PKCE. We in this code flow we use the PKCE, so there are another parameter need to supply. The first is code challenge method S256, and the code challenge. This challenge we can create the code challenge online like this. We can create online, but in your application you need to create the code verifier and the code challenge. Use the code, maybe use the JavaScript or Java or Python, blah blah blah. Okay, here I just generate online. The code challenge is this one. I copy it. Code challenge, copy it, paste it here. And now we are ready. The different this OAuth2 link. The different is this part. The code challenge method and code challenge. Okay, all the parameter ready. We can click it. Open it in the browser. Now again, we direct to the login page and submit it, and check the accounts, confirm, redirect. Now validate because the redirect already finished, because the URL is not be supported by the PC browser. So let me try again. Okay, this link. This time I will open the web console. Okay, enter. Okay, this link. Wait a moment. Okay, try again. Confirm. Now we can see we redirect to this link. Of course, our browser can't support this schema. Okay, we can only copy this code. With this code, we can exchange the access token. Now, let me exchange the token. Here, paste the code, and here is the client ID. Client ID, let me copy the client ID. But because our flow is PKCE flow, so we can't use the client secret. We need to use the code verifier. Where is the code verifier? It is at here. We generate it online. Okay, paste it at here. Okay, we are ready. We have the code and the client ID, and redirect URL also need to change. redirect URL at here. Paste. Okay. Send. Okay. We get the access token, and with the access token, we can call the endpoint. Okay, we get the result. Okay, for the mobile application, we need to create two consumers. One is the web consumer, because we need to use that client ID and client secret to create client credentials access token. And when we access this OAuth2 link, we need to open the web console to have a look the return code. Okay, for the other step, it's just the same as web application. Okay, for the code change method and code challenge, maybe you need to reference other web page to learn how to create it with different languages. Okay, that's all.